Good evening, everyone. We're going to start in a few moments, but we're just going to give everyone a couple of beats here to enter the webinar and go ahead and settle in. Okay, I see people are joining us, and we will get started momentarily with tonight's webinar, Selling Your Dental Practice, Navigating the Journey from A to Z. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Shirley, and I will be your moderator this evening. Tonight's webinar is going to guide you through the essential steps to ensure a seamless transition in the sale of your dental practice. We are going to address some crucial aspects, such as minimizing pre- and post-sale liability issues, increasing the saleability and marketability of your practice, and reducing the stresses commonly associated with business sales. So we're excited that you're going to join us as we delve into some key strategies for a successful transition. And we have some pretty exceptional speakers with us this evening. So I'd like to introduce them all to you. And I'm going to start with Barb Johns. She's an experienced transition consultant and sales representative working in Ontario and across Canada. Barb began working in the dental industry and Tier 3 several decades ago. She provides white glove services to dentists seeking to value and/or sell their practices. We also have with us Ryan Devereaux, who is a business advisor. Hi, Ryan, and partner at MNP working in Southwestern Ontario. Ryan delivers clear, concise tax and consulting guidance to owner-managed businesses with a particular focus on dentistry. We also have Ryan Kinsella. Hi, Ryan. And Ryan Kinsella has over 10 years of professional and healthcare banking experience, and he's going to provide you with the guided expertise that's required in your constantly moving life. Ryan and the professional team at TD can help with each of your needs from personal banking to business evolution. And last but not least, we have Michael Kuttner. Hi, Michael, all the way at the bottom there. Michael Kuttner's legal practice focuses on providing comprehensive assistance to dental and medical professionals for their business needs. His expertise extends to facilitating the buying and selling of dentistry and other health-related practices. So that's all of our speakers for tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and launch a very quick poll that we'd love to get you. And I'm going to give everyone just, about 55 seconds to answer those questions. Okay, 1 second.
These are not the right questions.
And these are not, this is listed as our first one. I'm going to relaunch this, guys, if you give me a few
Sorry,
moments
thank
here.
you.
Yes, I saw that.
Thanks.
And can you still see it there?
Yeah, I can.
You can. Okay, because I'm trying to bring it down. And if you guys give me a few moments. Oh, I see. Okay, 1 second. Here we go. There we go. It's all the way at the bottom, but it's the first one.
Go figure. It's all good.
So thank you guys for your patience, and we'll give you 60 seconds on the clock. I don't know if you can see the clock. I can, and I'll give everyone a few moments to answer those. Okay, answers are still coming in, and we have about 18 seconds on the clock.
No answer, so I'll be flying off the cuff. It's all good.
People are coming in, they're answering some pretty specific, obvious answers right now. Let's see.
Maybe after they hear the new tax changes, they'll be more inclined to
Yeah.
be more in a rush to
That's true.
sell. I don't know.
Ah, there we go. There's the answers. I couldn't see them. I could only see the questions. So, okay.
We just closed the poll, and as you can see
Wait.
to the question, I'm sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead, Barb, if you wanna.
I
you
was
can-
just gonna say, guys, I'm just gonna jump in right now and start with things. So, most of the people on the call, do already own a practice, which is great. And almost 50% or over 50% of you have obtained an appraisal in the last 1 to 5 years, which is fantastic. About the same number, the same percentage, are not quite prepared if you needed to be able to exit your practice right away or sell right away. And most of you do not understand what percentage of your retirement portfolio that your practice represents. And I would argue that's a really, really important question, because if you are counting on the sale of your practice to at least fully or partially fund your retirement, you probably need to know what it's worth. So we'll get to that. So right now, I would like to thank you for your time this evening. I know everybody's really busy. We're going to go through this on a pretty quick pace, but feel free to please put any questions you might have into the Q&A, and then we will bring those, we'll sort of answer those at the end of the evening. And if there's enough of them, then we can always answer them offline. And each one of the presenters, Ryan, Michael, and I, we're all quite happy to have conversations with you on an individual basis if you want after the fact. I'm just going to go through here. So let's start with the A's. So if we are going to go from A to Z, and we're in Canada, so we do say Z, so you can tell that our moderator is from the US because she said Z. So when we are sort of looking at your process, getting you from the finish line, the starting line to the finish line, you have to start with an appraisal. Obviously you can't sell your practice without having an appraisal. So starting with the appraisal is always the right thing to do. However, there's lots of reasons people get appraisals, and they don't all have to do the selling. But that is one of the most common reasons. So you can get those to future or save plan, so that if you do have to exit quickly, you're ready to do that. Marital purposes, sort of set up or restructuring of a partnership or dissolving a partnership. You might need to obtain new funding to be able to practice a purchase. You might want to improve your value or just improve your ownership experience. So if we're going to get an appraisal, you need to also understand the basics of dental economics. So really easy, made up of 3 things: your revenue, your expenses, and your earnings. Sounds simple, right? So what creates revenue? We're going to talk about that first. Patients and only patients create revenue in your practice. So it doesn't matter how beautiful your practice is, doesn't matter where it's located, doesn't matter what kind of technologies you have in the practice, or even what kind of treatments you can provide. If you don't have any patients and you don't have any bottoms sitting in the chairs, you're not generating any revenue. So you really need to understand your patient base so that you can properly assess where your strength is and where your weaknesses are. And so that means, looking at exact patient counts, looking at trends over time, looking at your patient spending and comparing that and benchmarking it against other practices in the province and around the country, depending on where you are, and understanding, do you have unrealized revenue? Do you have something that is, limiting your ability to maximize the revenue that you could be? How strong is your hygiene program? So now we've talked about sort of your revenue. Let's look into your expenses. Let's delve or D into those expenses. Okay, so when you're looking at your cost efficiency, you have 3 major expenses in your practice after you've compensated all the dentistry for their dentistry. These are your wages and benefits, your dental supplies, and your occupancy costs. And so your occupancy costs are a sort of an immovable expense line. You don't get to change that. You can't improve upon it. You can't reduce it. It is what it is, and it's fixed. It's a fixed cost. However, your dental supplies, you might have an ability to affect. Wages and benefits are a little harder, especially with staffing challenges that we're seeing in the provinces today. But that is another area that you might want to look at. But mostly you need to know, where do you compare to other practices? Are you like this practice and you have above average wages and benefits and above average occupancy costs, but somehow you're super efficient with your dental supplies? And what's the implication of that for your practice value? When you are doing providing your information to an appraiser or a brokerage firm, I want you to know that our motivation to help you is a little different than your accountants. And Ryan Devereaux, you can speak to that, but your accountant's job is to make your corporation, within reason, obviously, look as poor as possible because it minimizes your corporate taxes. And our job is to make your practice look as profitable as possible in order to maximize your value. So we're not always looking at the same thing. So things that are absolutely allowable expenses on your expense statements, those are things like your professional fees and dues, travel expenses, charitable donations, meals, entertainment. All of those things are allowed in your DPC to reduce the amount of taxes you might pay, but we add all of those back because they belong to you as an individual and they are a management decision. They are not actually required to run a dental practice. So we figured out that where revenue's coming from patients, expenses. Now we need to look at earnings. Okay, so a lot of people hear the term EBITDA, and if that's your earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, or EBITDA, depending on how people pronounce that. What I can tell you is that EBITDA is not a true picture of your earnings because one way or the other, there are always taxes that have to be paid. So if someone was to buy your practice and they already have millions of dollars sitting in their bank account and they don't need to get a loan, they're still going to have to pay corporate taxes. So earnings are your expenses, and that has to include taxes. So earnings equals your revenue minus your expenses. Pretty simple. And your cash flow equals your earnings, also called profit in the old days before we were using terms like cash flow. So what I want you to know is that most practices in the province the value is determined by applying an earnings multiple against the earnings that are in the practice. So, and most GP practices in Ontario are for between 5.5 and 6 times earnings multiples. And if you're out of province and you're in one of the other provinces in our country, they vary by province. So we have that data and we make sure that you're valued appropriately for the area of the province or the country that you're in. A really simple example is if we took a practice that's got $1 million in revenue and it's got $800,000 in expenses after the compensation to the dentist, then it would have $200,000 in earnings. And $200,000 times that 6-point multiple would make that practice worth 1.2 million. Consider now that same practice if it had $300,000 in earnings and it was a very cost efficient practice. So that particular practice then would be 6 times 300,000 or 1.8 million. So it makes a really big difference understanding fully the expenses in a practice. Let's look at some of the focus on some of the potential threats in your practice. Threats to revenue, staffing, right? The CDCP plan maybe. Tenancy uncertainty, threats to your expenses, staff again. There's a theme that's running through there. Supplies and equipment inflation, overinflated premises costs, or too much space or too little, and threats to your earnings, rising interest rates, the DSOs, high ethnic skews, co-payment write-offs, remote locations, etc. So there's lots of threats to that earning multiple. If you want to get improvements into place in your practice, a lot of people ask me, when should I do that? I'm always telling you now. You don't need to wait until you're about to sell to put improvements in place, just like you don't want to repaint your house the day before you sell it, because wouldn't it be nice to enjoy that new paint job for a while before it gets sold? So pay off your loan sooner, free up extra cash so you can buy a second practice or refinance or expand or get new equipment. Sell your practice for more money in the future, but right now you can take home more money at the end of each year. And isn't that also the goal? So do you have a formula to improve your value? You do. It's really easy. Increase your revenue and reduce your costs, because that creates greater cash flow. Greater cash flow equals a higher value. So that seems really easy in theory, not so easy to implement in reality. So what can you do? Ask yourself the following questions. Is your patient base growing? Will it continue to grow? Are you spending advertising dollars well? Do you have upside potential? Can you increase revenues by introducing technologies? It doesn't even make sense to do that at this stage in your career. You can jump you can jump right in at any point and you can take control of some of the management decisions and some of the ways your practice is running. So have you ever done an analysis to look at your cost structure? Have you ever had your equipment supplier and your sundry supplier do an analysis for you? Maybe there's a way for you to consolidate spending to reduce expenses. What about bank and telephone costs? They're a way that I almost guarantee almost everyone can save money on their banking and telephone costs. Are you giving away money through copay write-offs or really generous discount policy? Are you overstaffed? Are you understaffed? Do your open hours match what your practice needs really are? So know those expenses. It's really important to know your expenses. If you can save $1, that $1 will turn into $5.50 to $6.50 more dollars at the time of the sale. So put another way, if you could drop your expenses by 40 grand, that would add $220,000 to $260,000 to your practice value. It's a huge return on the investment that you will spend looking at your expense structure. So whether you're 6 months, 2 years, 10 years, whatever it might be away from selling, never too early to look at your expenses. So I want you to let the right advisors be part of your team as you move forward. That means you need industry specific specialists. It's really important. I like to use an analogy that if you are a GP dentist, there's only so much you can do. You send the super complicated endos or oral surgery cases, you send them to the specialist. You don't try and deal with an oral pathology case by yourself. You forward it on to someone else. Your practice sale or your practice purchase, if you're the person out there who doesn't own a practice yet, those are arguably the two biggest transactions you'll have in your entire life potentially, and they need to go to the specialists. Okay, so you can go back to your regular accountant if you want to after a sale is finished, or you might choose to stay with the accountant that's actually managed to save you $1 gazillion. But whatever you want to do, make sure you use the right team. So an appraiser from an accredited appraisal company is absolutely critical. You need to be able to get your bank financing, and you can't get your bank financing unless the bank accepts the appraisal that gets submitted to them. Okay, so that's a really important part of the process. You also want to make sure that the appraiser can help squeeze out every penny of value in your practice that they can. Okay, and they can help you get in touch with the right team members for the rest of your process if you don't know who they are. A broker, if you choose to use one, acts like a grand marshal in a parade, and they keep everybody moving towards the same goal, the same finishing line. And that broker or that sales rep, they need to be able to find the right buyer, get you the best possible terms. They need to have a strong marketing plan. They need to be able to liaise with all the parties all the way through the system, all the way through the process. So your broker, your sales rep, only gets paid if you're successful. So they are very motivated to help you get to the finish line. Optimizing the person that you use as your accountant. Okay, so an accountant looks after who looks after clients that are from a broad range of different businesses, and personal, does a lot of personal accounting, may not be the right accountant for you at the time of your sale. You need someone, again, who's very, very experienced with specifically with dental practice sales. That you want them to be able to help you to minimize your tax obligations at all stages of your career. But if necessary, use a transactional account, at least for the sake of the sale. Okay, it's really important at that time because you don't want to lose a lot more money to the CRA than you would otherwise be required to. But you need time for that. Your accountant needs 3 years. So even if you don't contact the appraiser or anyone else, contact your accountant. If your accountant does need to do financial restructuring, they're going to tell you need an appraisal to get that done. So it's kind of one feeds the other. Okay. And I'm not going to talk too much about this because I'm going to let Ryan Devereaux talk about it, but we don't want you to lose any money to the CRA that you don't need to. Okay, and there's issues with DPCs all the time that force our clients to sell as asset sales instead of share sales. And it's usually to do with the financials and the structure of the DPC, and because they didn't try and contact us far enough ahead of time to be able to fix those issues. You can make that choice to do that. Please choose the right purchase and sale agreement lawyer. I can't, again, stress how critical this is. So again, even if you choose to sell your practice on your own and you don't use a broker or a sales rep, and getting an appraisal does not obligate you to use a sales rep. So they're not connected. They're two separate sort of things that we offer, services. Please use the right kind of lawyer too. So your lawyer is going to again make sure that you have no post-sale liability issues that pop up because of your purchase and sale agreement. And they're going to make sure that the terms that you think you've agreed to with a buyer are actually the terms that actually go into the agreement and the contract that you're going to sign. So a lawyer that provides, again, that wide range of legal services, they're doing what I believe is too much. They're too diversified to be specialized in one particular area. And you wouldn't send, just like you have specialists that you send your patients to when they need advanced treatment, you need advanced treatment.
And Barb, if I could interrupt on that one point, it's
Absolutely.
Michael. Your lawyer's there to protect you, as Barb said, and you've got to be honest and forthright with all the information you're giving. I think that's also a really important point to make sure your lawyer is in the know with all the details of your practice.
Exactly. Well, I'm going to get to that too. You're leading
Oh,
into
I'm
one of my
sorry,
next
I'm ahead of you.
slides. It's all good. It's all good. We're feeding each other. It's just the way it should be. So two other experts that you may want to consider and you may need to use, maybe don't, but if you need it, you need a qualified lease expert if you're having problems with your tenancy. Ryan Kinsella can nod his head and he can say that if there is no tenancy, the bank will not provide funding. Okay, so it is a really big deal, guys. So it is arguably the biggest thing that is holding up practice sales and the closing dates now. It is issues to do with tenancy and landlords. Michael will nod his head too because he knows that too. So it is a really big deal. I can't even emphasize. So there's lots of companies out there that do it. Cirrus is a really good one. WeCare is another one. So if you need help to understand who to contact, you can ask your sales rep or your broker. You can always ask me anytime, even if you're not my client, and I'll still help you put the right team in place. Retain an employment lawyer if you need that too. So again, that's one of the things that if you're working with someone like Michael can up front say to you, oh wow, you got a lot of staff that have been with you for more than 20 years and you don't have any staff contracts in place. There may be post-sale termination liability that's significant that you will have to agree to take on. And if you don't want to take on any liability potentially post-sale, then you probably need to get that resolved too. So let's take a look at things that affect your value versus things that affect your saleability or your marketability. So things that affect your value will actually cause your value to be lower, clearly, right? But things that affect your saleability and your marketability might not directly impact the value of your practice, but they might impact the attractiveness so that we would have fewer people that would come to the table, fewer offers and less choice for you with regards to which purchaser you choose. Some things affect both. So I'll just pause here for a second because there's a lot of information on this and you will be able to receive a copy of the presentation when we're finished. So you'll get the slides if you want to take a look at these things again in the future. But typical factors that impact value and saleability is all the things on here. You can look at some of these and I'm just going to talk about two. A lot of people will call me up and say, Barb, do you think I need to repaint my practice before I put it on the market? And what I can tell you is that's probably a really cheap investment that might pay off a lot. It's not going to change the value of your practice by one penny, but it might absolutely make a difference if your practice is still, a rose pink and a teal blue left over from 1988. Okay. However, there's other things where it does not make sense to invest money in. There are things that you're doing in your practice that may be impacting the value and the attractiveness or the saleability. Copay write-offs are one of them. For a lot of people, that's an absolute deal killer. Okay. So higher impact value things are on the left, as you can see, and some lower impact things are on the right. And when I talk about that, let's talk about things like the practice age. A lot of new buyers get fixated on a practice that isn't bright and shiny new metal glass, a marble, whatever. But patients don't know the practice is older. It's their dental home, so they don't judge it. And if you come in and you take over and you slowly but surely have someone, update things, that works out well. So as an owner who's looking to sell, you don't necessarily have to make all of those changes yet. Understand the role that all of these factors that are in these puzzle pieces that are in front of you, understand the role that these have in your purchase and sale agreement and during due diligence. So all of these items, if they have not been disclosed fully and thoroughly and properly within the appraisal, can cause your deal to fall apart during the due diligence stage. It hasn't even gotten to the purchase and sale or contract stage. And these are the same things that you're going to have to sign a lot of warranties and sort of guarantees in your purchase and sale agreement that everything you have disclosed is true and honest. Okay. And that leads directly into the fact that your value is completely dependent on how accurate the appraisal is. So if you want to get your practice sold, it needs to be very accurate. Like, do not hold anything back. Ultimately, it is up to you as the owner to make sure that the appraisal accurately reflects your practice. So the appraiser is going to come in and rely on a lot of information that you share. So if you don't disclose something and then it comes around and bites you in the butt later because your deal falls apart, then you need to look at that yourself. So we want to see your warts and pimples. We won't necessarily share those with all of the purchasers unless we need to, but we still need to understand them. So, specifically, are you writing off your copays? Are you charging the fee guide? Have you disclosed all the benefits you're actually giving to your staff members? Has unionization been discussed in your practice? Not really a big deal as much as it was 8 or 10 years ago, but is it there? Do you actually own your intellectual property? Because you might not if you're with Yellow Pages, for instance. And extra issues that you need to consider. Again, lease considerations. Is your lease assignable? Is there personal or estate ongoing liability? That means, is it possible that your lease is written in such a way that even after you assign the lease over to a new buyer, if that buyer defaults or the buyer's next buyer defaults 35 years from now, can the landlord come back to you or to your family to demand reparation for unpaid rent? Are there obligations that you're going to have when you transition out of the practice? Are they going to be, first of all, are they going to be what you want them to be? Are you going to be able to live with them? And is it based on terms that you wanted or you negotiated, or just on what the buyer is demanding? Because you're the one in control. So some potential legality and liability issues that are not in an appraisal. So we do not address these. We do not ask you about them when we don't address them at the appraisal stage. Have you had any embezzlement concerns, whether past or ongoing? What about our CDSO complaints? Have you had any regulatory issues? Do you have any past threatened future potential litigation issues? Please disclose those to your lawyer. You don't have to tell them to your appraiser or your broker or your sales rep yet, but you ought to know that it's better for them to understand that stuff too, because they can help mitigate any concerns that a buyer might have. So last slide for me, for you guys. So getting you from A to whatever your Z looks like. Okay. So try and get an appraisal done. Pre-plan, ideally 3 to 5 years ahead of time, but 6 months ahead is even helpful. And every 5 years throughout your entire career, so that you stay on top of your practice from start to finish. Understand the issues that are impacting your saleability, your marketability, your value, and mitigate things that could cause you problems in the future. Protect your family, guys. Protect your family. Put an appraisal away, even if you only get one done. Get it, put it away, put it aside with your will, so that at least your family would know who to contact in the event that something really horrible would happen. And choosing that right team, it's kind of, I've said that already, so I don't need to say it over again. And I'm going to end with what I started with, which is, do you know what percentage of your retirement portfolio that your practice represents? Because if you're heading towards a sale, you probably need to know that. Okay, over to you, Shirley, so you can throw out the next poll.
Barb, one of the things you mentioned I thought was really smart is getting your wills in place. There was a large investor dentist who recently passed away with about 5 practices, and luckily they had everything in place. So, but that's not always the case. So I think that was a really good point.
To that point, Michael, there was another dentist that passed away maybe 7 or 8 weeks ago. And very suddenly, just so you know, guys, fine one day and gone the next day. And he did not even have a will. So not only did he not have appraisals done, or anything like that. He didn't even have a will. So now there's a question about who even owns the estate, who's going to be selling the practice. And I think we're at the 6 or 7 or 8 week mark now. And I know that practice has no patients left.
It also causes a big tax problem if you don't have proper dual wills in place.
Yeah.
And that can help you shield the value of your practice from a state administration tax. So if you don't have any, that's, your estate's paying big taxes on your death. So
Yeah, it's really big, guys. So please, please, please don't bury your heads in the ground about this. Okay, over to you.
And I've just published the results of the poll and selling your dental practice in case Barb, you or Michael wanted to say anything about it.
well, I think I'm gonna, Barbara, you controlling
sorry.
my slides here?
I am. So the poll's still up there. Do you want to go through them really quickly so you can see the questions that people did or did not know?
I can't see the question.
Oh, you can't see them. Okay, so I'll let you know that 60% of the respondents said they understood the fundamental differences between a share sale and an asset sale, but 40% do not understand that.
Okay, so we'll move through that quickly since the majority know it, but 40% will go through that on my slide.
And so poll question number 2 was 25% of people know that their minute book is up to date and their corporate structure is ready for a sale, and 75% have no idea if their corporate structure is ready for a sale.
So
And
I would say from the legal perspective, find out where your minute book is to start. That's your starting point. Make sure you have one. And then from there, get a lawyer and accountant to, look at it, see what needs to be updated, because that's going to be important on the sale.
And 100% of people said they had no potential legal liability concerns that they needed to speak to a lawyer about right now. So that's good.
Amazing.
Okay, so moving back into this, that's
So,
Michael.
Thanks, Barb. Always a pleasure to present with you. And Ryan, we've done a couple now. So my name is Michael Kuttner, and I'm from KPK Law. It used to be known as Kuttner Law up till January 1st, but I've merged with a few professionals. Barb, you can go to the next slide. So that's a picture of me 10 years ago, and I like to say about 250 dental deals ago. So KPK Law, we assist dentists with buying and selling practices, starting up new practices, associate agreement, shareholders agreement. I always like to say if a dentist gets in trouble with the RCDSO or litigation or employment issues, I pass that off to another lawyer. I do the more fun, good law, as I call it. So that's our bread and butter, is buying and selling of dental practices. Barb harped on this, and she's completely right. Get the right team around you. Get a broker, accountant, lease negotiator, and a lawyer who has experience in this area. I can't tell you how many times inexperienced team members can really slow down the process, cause errors, delays. I had a deal that closed a week ago, and I know we're going to talk about extras floor plans, and I acted for the seller, and she didn't have the extras plans, but the buyer never asked for them. And now they're scrambling because they want to do renovations. They don't have the plans. The buyer's lawyer had never done a dental deal, didn't know about that specific issue, which is relevant for dental practice, which may not be relevant in other industries. Slide. So this is just a roadmap of a typical transaction. Now, most of what I'm going to say is based on how a tier 3 deal goes. Every broker runs their deals a little bit differently. If you're selling to a DSO, it's different. Dentist to dentist could be different. But on a tier 3 deal, the way they start is they'll prepare a letter of intent. From there, the buyer will do their due diligence. Then the lawyers will prepare the purchase agreement. We then go to the lease financing conditions. And then once all those conditions are waived, we'll go to close the transaction. Barbie, next slide. Letter of intent. So letter of intent is a non-binding agreement setting out the basic terms of the transaction. So it includes the purchase price, the non-competes, the conditions, so financing, due diligence, lease conditions are generally your main conditions. Has timelines. It also has exclusivity clause, which means the seller for a period of time is locked up, can't shop the practice to other people, confidentiality provisions, which sellers are always concerned about. Once the letter of intent has been signed, the due diligence generally starts, especially on a tier 3 deal. Utilizing a DPC, I know Ryan's probably looking at these numbers saying they're out of date, they're no good. Ryan, I'll let you talk about the tax savings of utilizing a denture professional corporation if you own a practice. The big one, and why most deals are share deals, is because of the capital gains exemption. So you've probably heard all these changes the Liberal government is making to taxes, how they may negatively impact dentists. One of the positives, obviously, they've increased the capital gains exemption to that $1.25 million number. And if Ryan's your accountant and he's, I know he's trying to properly structure your denture professional corporation, you have a large practice, you can add your spouse, you can add your children as shareholders, you can add your parents as shareholders, and if some of those come with their own issues, and then you can multiply the capital gains exemption. So, a standard structure, dentist, spouse, it'll soon be $2.5 million tax-free. That's not bad. Just one other point, if you have multiple practices, you should always make sure each practice is in its own DPC. That provides a lot more flexibility. Slide. So share sale versus asset sale, as I said, most sellers want to sell shares for the capital gains exemption. Sometimes they can't. Buyers generally want to buy assets. There's less risk to them, and it's better from a tax perspective. But I've been doing this for 10 years, and it always seems like if it's a good practice, the seller is dictating the structure of that transaction. If you're doing an asset deal, you got to make sure you have an experienced accountant on the buyer side and the seller side, so they can allocate the purchase price to specific assets, so everyone's protected from a tax perspective and getting the best results. An asset deal, just so you understand, is the buyer is buying the equipment, supplies, goodwill, leaseholds. Whereas a share deal is the buyer is buying the denture professional corporation of the seller, which owns the practice. So that's really the difference between the two. Slide. Due diligence. So what I tell buyers, the most important thing you can do is your due diligence. Every person in the transaction, so your accountant, lawyer, and the dentist all have a role to play in that due diligence. As good as Tier 3's appraisals are, I always tell buyers, don't rely on it. You need to make sure the information that you are getting is correct, and you need to verify that. So buyers are going to come into your practice, do chart counts, check the equipment. Ryan, as the accountant, is going to check out all the financial information. As lawyers, we conduct searches. So is there any litigation? Is there any judgments? Are there any PPSAs registered, loans or anything? And also, I'm also going to ask for the last 3 HARP reports and back to the X-RIS approved floor plans. If you don't have them in place, check your records. It comes up on every deal, especially older practices. Get them in place. It really simplifies things. I know Barb, can you speak to what you do for your clients in terms of getting those plans for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I have a client who signs a listing agreement with me, one of the first things I do is I get an iGuide virtual or videography tour done of the practice. That provides me with floor plans. The floor plans can then be shared, and through our connections, because I am part of Henry Schein now, we can get the XRIS application process put together very, very quickly. It's very professionally done. It costs very little money, much less than it would if you had to do it yourself. And it's usually flawlessly goes through the system. If you have deficiencies that get noted, you are going to have to correct those deficiencies. So that could be things like the switches for your x-rays aren't on the outside of your rooms in an appropriate position or appropriate place, or maybe you're missing some lead lining if you've got a much older practice that happens to be within that 3-year time frame when the RCDS did not require, and the Ministry of Health did not require x-ray lining. That was a long time ago. But if that, if you fall in that range, then you might have to get some work done. But better this, and if we get it done, it takes somewhere between 6 and 10 weeks, guys, to get that approval in place.
And if you
So
don't
this
have
has
them,
the
and
go
Barb, if
ahead.
you don't have them at closing, just to reiterate the problem,
Yeah.
the lawyers will, the buyer's lawyers will request holdbacks and undertakings and indemnities. Preferably everything set by closing. We close deals without them, and then they get done after closing at the cost of the seller. And there's risks to that, as Barb was saying. If you have to do renovations to bring the practice to compliance, get those plans approved, that's an extra cost that you probably wanted to know before you even close. So, anyways, that's one point. When you hire Barb or whatever you're selling, think about that, or think about it now, I would say. Next slide. So once the due diligence is done, the lawyers will start preparing the purchase agreement. And that's like a 40-page document. And then when you add the schedule, so the lease, the employment contracts, the material contracts, that can be easily a 200-page document. The purchase agreement is going to incorporate all those terms of the LOI in greater detail. Slide. So Barb touched on this during her presentation, representations and warranties. So that's about 10 pages of those 40 pages. And what that is the buyer wants the seller to make certain representations and warranties about the practice, their DPC, the dentist personally. And if those turn out not to be true and correct, and the buyer suffers damages after closing, a lawsuit could occur, right? They're going to come back and sue the seller. So, Barb, I know made this example. So a common representation that the seller often makes is that substantially all co-payments of the practice have been collected in compliance with applicable law. So if after closing, the buyer finds out that co-payments hadn't been collected and patients start going away, or the insurance company or the RCDSO comes and causes an issue and the purchaser suffers damages, and I've seen that happen before, they're going to have there's going to be a big lawsuit on their hand, and they're going to go back to the purchase agreement and they're going to say, you misrepresented. Slide.
And if I can just speak to that really quickly, if you are a practice that is writing off some co-pays, while that's not ideal, as long as it is disclosed, then you're not going to sign a representation and a warranty that you're substantially collecting everything. So it's going to be slightly worded slightly differently so that it speaks that there is, you have disclosed your co-pay write-off policy. So that doesn't mean you can't sell your practice. It just means everything has to be disclosed and properly put into the agreement.
Yeah, but to that point, I mean, if a significant amount of the co-pays aren't being collected, buyers are going to get nervous about that, right? So assignment of a lease, Barb talked about this as well. Biggest hurdle of pretty much every deal. Half my day is spent butting heads with landlords because frankly, they don't care about a tenant. Dentists are AAA tenants, but they only generally lease 1 to 2,500 square feet in a plaza or an office building or whatever it may be. So they make these deals very difficult, and we need them. I always tell dentists, as annoying as your landlord may be throughout your tenancy, be nice to them, because when you get to the end of your career or whenever you're planning on selling, you're often going to have to ask them for a favor. So the banks amortize their loans now over 12 years. And so they want to see 12 years of term left on that lease. So if you have only 4 years left on the lease, you have a problem if the landlord's not going to extend it. Same thing with demolition clauses. I mean, the banks are reluctant, depending on buildings, and it's becoming a little more flexible, but banks are reluctant to finance on an older, let's say, plaza that has a demolition clause on it. It can be difficult to sell, and I see that all the time now. Slide. Beyond demolition clauses, which you hear all the time, there's other small provisions in leases that can make it difficult to sell. So I have one example here where I had a dentist who had a practice on Bloor Street, and she went to go sell it. It was not a big practice, $600,000, and she had 2 5-year options. So she had the 12 years remaining. The problem is the option language said these options to renew are personal to Dr. X, right? And so what that meant is when she sold, Dr. Y, who was buying, wouldn't have the ability to exercise those options. So it was a problem, and the buyer's lawyer brought it up. So we went to the landlord, yeah, could we please have a simple amendment, just transfer these renewal options? The landlord said, sure, no problem, pay me $100,000. We begged, we pleaded, there was nothing we could do. My client paid the $100,000 and the deal closed. So these are the type of small clauses that, hire a company like Cirrus, make sure your lawyers looked at the lease. That's one of the important things in terms of practice value and your ability to sell. Slide. Associate agreement is also another important part. What are you selling? It's really, a large portion of that is goodwill for a dental practice. And how do you protect that? If you have a long-term associate at that practice, or even not long-term, anytime you have an associate, you should have an associate agreement in place that has restrictive covenants. The buyers are looking at those contracts to ensure that there's, a non-solicit provision of employees and staff. They want to make sure that when they buy that practice, the next day, the associate is not going to open up next door and take all the patients. Especially if there's long-term associates there, that even the banks will look and ask for that as a precondition to their financing. Slide.
If I can just add something really quickly to that. There is a misconception in the marketplace that non-competition clauses are not enforceable. And there is legislation around that. And I'm not a lawyer like Liz, but what I can tell you is your associates are not employees. So the employment law that exists with regards to non-competition does extend to employees. Your associates are independent contractors, so they don't fall under the same thing.
So I get emails on that every day. I have a non-compete in my associate agreement. My friend told me it's illegal now. As Barb was saying, that legislation applies to employees, not independent contractors. With that being said, the non-competes are generally not enforceable in court, but I always tell associates, sign a contract planning to abide by that. As the principal, you can make their life difficult by just bringing a lawsuit, whether you win or not, who knows? But most dentists will abide by a reasonable non-compete. So, they're certainly not illegal. That legislation does not apply to independent contractors. So you still are seeing them in associate contracts for sure.
The non-solicitation part is more enforceable.
Those are
It's just hard to, yeah,
Those
it's just harder to prove.
It can be difficult to prove. So when you're selling, you've got to consider, what are your future plans? Are you retiring? Are you planning on opening practice in the future? So you got to think about that in terms of, what is the non-compete, non-solicit terms that you're willing to provide to that buyer. So typically you're seeing 3 to 5 years in terms of duration of that non-compete, non-solicit. And what is the radius in terms of where you're not willing to practice? Obviously, it has to be reasonable. If you're in downtown Toronto, 5 kilometers. If you're in rural Ontario, it's going to be a much larger radius. So you really got to consider that. Are there patients you want to exclude from the non-solicit? So, you've got to think about all those things when you're looking to sell. What are your future intentions? And just going back to the last point, the non-compete will be upheld in court on the purchase of a dental practice. So notwithstanding they're not enforceable against just a regular associate, they will be enforceable against a seller. Vendor to associate post-closing, general transition 6 months to a year, and that's to provide the transition of the patients and the staff. If you are selling to a DSO, Dental Corp 1, 2, 3, whomever it may be, they tend to want a longer 3 to 5 year period for you to transition. You're going to sign an associate agreement similar to what your associates may have already signed, where you get your percentage of collected billings. You'll have your restrictive covenants in there. Standard associate agreement is part of the sale. Slide. Employees, Barb touched on this, talk to an employment lawyer now, get good employment contracts in place. The courts are so in favor of employees when they're looking at these court cases that they're trying to find any which way to invalidate termination provisions. And the value of these contracts is having proper termination provisions, which limit your termination liability to the Employment Standards Act. So that's your max 8 weeks. The common law is where you get much higher if you don't have proper contracts or contracts at all. Now you're looking at 1 month per year that the employee's been there. Generally on the sale, employment contracts are not deal killers, but if you have a practice where the employees have all been there for 25 years, now the purchaser may be getting a bit nervous on those. Those can cause issues. So talk to your employment lawyer. You can save yourself a lot of money in the future if you get proper contracts in place. Slide. So once the conditions are waived, the banks approve, the landlords consented to the assignment of the lease, due diligence is good, the lawyers will then exchange closing documents, exchange money, and the deal closes. Slide. So just a couple slides on selling to a DSO. So I have Dental Corp, Ultima and 1, 2, 3 are actually the same since they merged a couple of years ago. The only thing I would say is, DSOs aren't for everyone, but they are for some. So, but be careful. The only thing I would say is on the letter of intent, they tend to be much more complicated than what you would see in a tier 3 letter of intent. They want you to stay on, as I said, as an associate for a longer period of time. There's revenue guarantees, as I'm sure you've heard. Sometimes the non-compete, non-solicits can be overly restrictive. Slide. Now, don't think that the first LOI that these DSOs may have given you is the final LOI. They are flexible in terms of the structures. So there is negotiation room. One thing I do caution is sometimes they'll try to, get a long exclusivity period. They'll tie you up for 6 months so you can't sell to anyone else. So make sure you have your lawyer look at that. You want to make sure everything is on the straight and narrow, and you're not signing something that will bite you from behind later on. So consider whether DSO right for you. It sometimes is, especially with a much larger practice, or if you're, not looking to retire right away, it could be a good option for you. Slide. So just to go over the 5 biggest issues we see on dental deals: the lease, not enough term demolition clause, no associate agreements, your DPCs not being properly structured before the sale. Talk to your accountant, make sure it's always properly structured, because, as Barb said, you don't know when you have to sell. Your state may have to sell the DPC. You may become disabled. Who knows? You want to always make sure you're as structured as properly as possible. no employment contracts, and then practices aren't being run in compliance with applicable laws, not collecting co-pays, IPAC issues, etc. So those are the 5 issues, and if you can get in front of those, your sale process is going to be a lot easier. Thank you very much.
Shirley, if you can pop up the next poll right now, that would be great. And once that poll completes, if you can actually give Ryan D, allow him to share his screen instead.
Wonderful, thank you. And here is our poll. We're about 15 seconds in, and we're going to leave it up for another 45 before we share the results.
This is poll number 2, not poll number 3. I think we're on the wrong poll. Is this the right one? Oh no, this might be the right one. I don't know. Now I'm all confused too, Shirley. So
I know, I think we changed the numbers, and I
Yes.
think this was the right one, but I can
Okay.
start it again. No problem.
Okay, sorry.
I could,
sorry,
no
to
worries at
people
all. It's-
listening in on
No.
listening in.
Sorry, everybody. No
Small
problem.
little technical difficulties.
Yeah. Is this okay? So there we go. There we go.
Yeah, okay.
And it's about
Yeah.
yeah. Do you already have one or more DPCs? And
Are you
The
already
rest of it,
financially structured properly, which doesn't say financially, but that's okay. It's all good. In addition to what Ryan was planning on speaking to you about, I hope he's also going to address the changing tax implications. They come into effect, I believe, some of them as early as June 25th.
Ryan, you can go ahead and share your screen. At the bottom of your screen, you're going to see that green share screen button. Be able to launch it that way. And while Ryan gets that screen up, which it is already up, I am sharing the results of the questions. Barb, did you say you wanted Ryan to
Yeah.
go ahead and talk to them?
Yeah, Ryan, you can address the answers to these questions and just share with everyone the results.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Barb. So if I take a look at the poll here really quickly, do you have more than one DPC? It's of the 8 people that responded, 6 people said yes, 2 said no. And then with respect to, do you need to be restructured or are you good to go? 4 of 8 said, yes, we need to be restructured. 3 think they're in good shape, and 1 does not know exactly. So
I think the one that does not know is one of the 2 people that doesn't have a DPC yet.
Perfect. So yeah, my name is Ryan Devereaux. I'm a partner at M&P. We're a mid-market accounting firm that operates across the country. My focus is dentistry. I operate or act for about 1,300 dentists on a day-to-day basis. And so, I have the pleasure of working with all these fine presenters on a regular. As you can see here in the next slide, we've got offices across the country. I actually work in every province except for Quebec. So, if you want my expertise, great. But if not, if you're in one of these regions, we can definitely connect you with the professionals individual in that region as well. It really, from my perspective, comes down to who you feel you're more comfortable with and who's the most knowledgeable with respect to your situation. So the one thing, as Barb had alluded to, there are substantial changes to the capital gains rate. And so one of the things that the most recent federal budget put in place was an increase to the capital gains inclusion rate. So I hear from a lot of people on a regular basis, they think the tax rate on capital gains is going up from 50% to 66%. That's not necessarily the case. The capital gains rate, personally, the highest rate was 26.76, so almost 27%. And what they've really done is they've increased that by approximately 8.8%. So now we're dealing, instead of, about 27%, we're dealing in closer to 36% tax rate ranges on capital gains. And why is that important? For all the people on this call, you're here for sale purposes, it seems to be. And so, this all takes effect June the 25th forward. One of the things that I've highlighted in the slide is for corporations, it's on the first dollar. So for example, if you do an asset sale, that increase in the tax rate happens on $1. If you're an individual instead selling shares of your corporation and you're not covered by, enough lifetime capital gains exemptions, then that portion of that increase takes effect above $250,000. So the one thing that I would say that this increase to the capital gain tax rate occurs is, there's a number of people trying to get their sales done by June the 25th. Is that reasonable for most people? No, it's absolutely not. If you had a deal that was, already in the works, could you potentially front load getting it done? Yes, yeah, you probably could. Is there some sort of restructuring that could be done to basically freeze and take advantage of more preferred rates right now? Truthfully, we really don't have definitive guidance on that. There was no draft legislation issued with the federal budget. So our overall guidance at this point in time is no, really, we can't give you a solid idea if you don't have a real sale that happens before June 25th, whether we're going to be able to reorganize into things to use those more preferred tax rates. The one thing that this increase in tax rate really has an impact on is increasing the importance of that qualifying share sale. And when I say qualifying, I'm alluding to that lifetime capital gains exemption that they've enhanced. And I'm going to go into that in the next slide in a little bit more detail. And the reason that I highlight this is on any asset sale after June the 25th, the 8.8% increase takes effect at top to bottom. So you don't have a choice on any asset sale. You've effectively, almost increased your sale of a dental practice asset sale by that amount. It's quite a substantial amount. And what I'm trying to highlight is it's incredibly important to be organized into share sales as dentists if you can. The one thing that I'm going to go through in a little bit more detail later is that a lot of people don't understand that if you own a dental practice and the shares qualify, and when I say qualify, I mean the shareholders have held the shares long enough. Usually that's 24 months. The dental practice is pure. And what I mean by that is there's mainly operating active assets, not a whole bunch of cash, investments, permanent life insurance policies. Sometimes your own success is a detriment to you, such that you have built up this cash, these investments, these permanent life insurance policies in your dental practice. And these non-active assets are throwing you offside for some of the qualifying factors into some of these share sales. And so these are some of the considerations I'll talk about in a little bit, just in terms of purification. The one thing I wanted to highlight for you, as I'm highlighting the importance of a qualifying share sale versus an asset sale, and I highlight qualifying again, because I've done a couple different scenarios here, and I'm just going to highlight them really quickly. If you had a $2 million sale and The impact of that $2 million sale based on the tax rate changes, if you are not organized properly, is another $176,000. If it's a $3 million sale, it's $265,000 as an increase to the tax that you're going to pay on an exit. If it's a $4 million sale, the 8.8% increase is a $350,000 increase just by Trudeau waving his magic wand. So when I look at those same sales and I consider you could be structured such that there's zero tax, by using all the appropriate lifetime capital gains exemptions, the differential in zero tax at 2 million, zero tax at 3 million, and zero tax at 4 million, at full tax at these new rates on a $2 million sale, it could be $720,000 of tax on a $2 million sale. On a $3 million sale, it's $1.1 million of tax if you're not structured properly. And on a $4 million sale, it's $1,450,000 of tax. So, I hate tax more than anybody else does. Absolutely. There's nobody that hates tax more than I do. These are offensive numbers whereby you could organize your dental practice, your building, if you had in a manner such that you could get around paying this tax, if you have a couple different things. If you have added the appropriate shareholders, and for a dental professional corporation, as Michael had nicely said before, it could be the dentist's mother, the dentist's father, the dentist's spouse, and the dentist's adult children or minor children. With all of these situations come pros and cons. Do I want to include my mother and father? Do we need secondary wills in place? Do we have estate considerations? Do I want to include my spouse? In most cases, you're on a divorce or a death, most of your money is going to your spouse anyway. That's a vast generality, but most often it is the dentist and the spouse. And then the other part is, do I want to include my children? Do they have their own lives? Are they minor children? Am I concerned about using their exemption, in lieu of them being able to use it? That's one of the main considerations that I get from people a lot of times. I don't want to use my children's exemptions. Well, I find the majority of the population, 99% of Canadians never use their exemption. So if you have the opportunity to use it, you might as well take advantage of using children's exemptions. There's something called the time value of money that makes it more advantageous to use your children's exemptions. And at the end of the day, usually most parents' inheritance are going to those children anyway. So they're getting to take advantage of it. No, I put B here because to be able to organize into one of these lifetime capital gains exemptions, we have to have lead time. As a professional, I need to be able to structure you properly so that you are organized into being able to qualify into this, that all of the shareholders have enough value that attributes to them. There's a whole bunch of lead time that is necessary. And I say the sooner the better. The quicker you can talk to a tax expert, whether it's me or somebody else, and get yourself set up so that you have all the appropriate participating shareholders and that you have something called ongoing purification in your company, the better. As we had highlighted, the lifetime capital gains exemption is increased, effective June 25th and after, to $1.25 million from what is in 2024, just over $1 million. It's indexed. It was increasing on a small. It was indexed and increasing, but they just increased it right to 250,000, or 1,250,000. So really, let's say for example, you had 4 shareholders. That covers $5 million of value, right? So if it was, the standard situation of dentist, spouse, minor or child 1, child 2, you've got $5 million of coverage. So you sell your dental practice for $5 million, you're going to exit, without any tax. There may be something that kicks up called an alternative minimum tax. That's fully recoverable, so I don't really consider it in my calculation over a period of time after sale. So it's a short-term capture tax, I would suggest. As we jump into the next slide, one of the very important pieces to be able to organize into one of these lifetime capital gains exemption is purification. And what I mean by that, and I spoke to really briefly earlier, is you can't have a whole bunch of inactive assets in your company. There's two tests. One of those is the 24 months before you sell, you have to have more than 50% of your value has to be active assets, or basically you can't have 50% passive assets in your company. So when I say passive assets, I mean cash that's not operational, so used for working capital, investments, so let's say stocks, bonds, real estate that is not actively used in your business, so like not your actual clinic, and large permanent life insurance or any level of permanent life insurance policies. Those are just some examples of inactive assets. We can do tax transactions if we have at least 24 months or even up, leading up to sale. There are certain transactions we can do, but at least 24 months ahead of sale is very helpful for us to do appropriate purification. Even much earlier than that, the better. But there, depending on your situation, we can do things ahead of sale to purify your company to qualify you into these. I won't get into the nitty-gritty technical details of what's required. Some things, just to give you some some of the strategies that are called single wing butterflies or roll and redeem strategies. There's multiple other things that you can do to try and purify these companies, but I won't go into the nitty-gritty on that. Again, using this lifetime capital gains exemption and undertaking a share sale is significantly more beneficial to you, to most of you. We would always want to evaluate the situation, but overall, I'm going to suggest that we're going to see a lot more share sales in the future than we are asset sales. I haven't spoke about hybrid sales because that's a portion asset and a portion share. But those we're going to be pushing for more of them to be more heavily weighted towards the share side of things if possible because of the tax consequences. This is one thing that Barb and I go through on a regular basis. In fact, having the building in a dedicated holding company, and one of the reasons is not always does the purchaser want to buy your building, or not always do you want to sell the building. It gives you flexibility if you have the building in a dedicated separate corporation. For all of my clients, when they're buying a dental building, we are setting up a dedicated holding company because we want to avoid paying HST in addition to the purchase price. And if you were to buy your building within your DPC, you have to pay HST on top. There's also additional considerations for having different shareholders of your building holding company. We can even get involved in family trust considerations as being the shareholder of your dental building that you don't have the capacity to do on a dental professional corporation, at least in Ontario. So that's just a really quick undertaking. Ryan,
can I speak to buildings for one quick second?
For
Something
sure.
else that we run across, guys, sometimes we can't, it could be an issue if your building is owned inside your corporation. If in fact the value of your building is such that now your practice does not support the mortgage that would be required for the building portion. Okay, so when you sell the shares of your corporation, the buildings inside there too, I want you to think about it. If the building normally a building would get amortized with the bank over 25 years, right? So, but a practice gets amortized over 12 years. So if you had to amortize the building over a 12-year time frame instead of 25, it would be a big difference. But if you own a practice that's a modest sized practice, and your value comes in at 900,000 or 1.2 million, if your building's worth $2 million, then the buyer can't afford to buy your building yet anyways, because the practice itself will not support the mortgage payments required for the building without completely decimating the actual value of the practice itself. And in that case, it might be more advantageous for you as, you know, an owner to hold on to that building for 3 to 5 years or 7 years until the buyer has paid off their original practice loan, at which point they could then buy the building from you.
Mhm.
So it's just something to keep in mind.
You know, one of the things that a lot of people miss as well is because if your building is rented by your dental professional corporation, the shares of the building also qualify for lifetime capital gains exemption. You know, that allows you to sell the shares of the building holding company using that exemption, and you need the appropriate shareholders on that building holding company. You know, I really like buying buildings in building holding companies because if you do so, you buy the building, you depreciate it over time, right? And so you get the tax advantage of depreciation within the building, and then you sell the shares of the building holding company to the new dentist. They end up getting the depreciated value of that building, and somehow in dental, it doesn't happen in all that many industries, but it really does in dental. There's there's not really a discount on selling the shares of that building, regardless of the fact that there's a pregnant tax liability there, something called recapture. Usually I see it go still at full value, full appraised value on that building. So it's kind of a trick for most people that buy buildings, depreciate them, and still sell them and exit the entire thing on a tax-free basis. It's pretty amazing. Great way to get money out of your corporation on a tax-free basis. So yeah, that's building holding companies. I like to keep them separate. The one other, you know, one of the main other things that Barb and I run into a lot is I want to do a share sale, but we've got multiple dental practices in the same company. And so, you know, not only is it somewhat confusing because, you know, generally the record keeping is not great when you have multiple practices in this in the same corporation, but it precludes you really from selling the shares of that corporation without selling both practices together, right? You can't sell one separate to the other without substantial reorganization and lead time and me, you know, switching one practice out to a new company and so forth. And so, you know, you end up with an asset sale. And now, like I said, we're into that significant increase in tax that Trudeau just put in front of everybody, the 8.8% increase, and none of that tax-free capability on that specific sale. So, you know, like I said, you know, it might cost you a little bit more on an annual basis from the compliance standpoint, but I think you save it in the long run, you know, in terms of complication. So I just said thank you. Thanks for listening to me. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions, I'll hand it over to the pros. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I believe, Barb, that Ryan Kinsella.
I think we have one more quick poll
That's right.
before
And
between the two
yep.
Ryans.
Exactly. I'm going to put that up right now. One.
Just while everybody's waiting for the poll to go up in front of them, and I'm going to take back the screen again and share my screen again. Just while we're waiting, everybody should know that after the webinar is completed, sometime in the next couple of days, I will get a recording of it that will be provided to me, and I will, on behalf of all of the presenters, send out that recording to everyone who's in attendance and everyone who registered, and I will send out everybody's business cards at the same time. So you've got everybody's contact details. Okay.
And our poll is live. We're about 5 seconds in, and we'll give everyone a few moments to fill that out. Okay, the answers are coming in. We're a little bit more than halfway through. I will be sharing the results in about 19 seconds.
Thank you, Shirley.
Okay, and that hits a minute. I am ending the poll now and going to share the results. There
All
we go.
right, so we got 50% of us that have do know what the bank requirements are. We've got about 33% that don't, and one that is unsure. And have you spoken with a healthcare professional banker regarding your plans for post-sale proceeds? A larger percentage, 67%, which I guess isn't terribly surprising, that are have not. One of our poll people answering at 17%. They have. So thank you very much for everyone for providing your information on the poll and on all four of the polls. It helps to get us kicked off here. My name is Ryan Kinsella. I am regional manager for professional banking for Southwestern Ontario, working alongside these fine people that have presented ahead of me. They have saved the best for last. I'm kind of the cheerleader. I'm going to sort of wrap the whole thing together. You're going to hear me touch on a few of the things that each of them have discussed as it pertains to the bank. But more importantly, talk about how we can assist on being able to help you as you approach selling and then the post-sale part of it. So let's get into it. All right, so for this first part, just a little bit about TD Bank and the way that we look at things. We do take a little bit of a different approach to the other financial institutions. Is our approach being very purpose-driven, a team approach, and advice-based guidance for our clients, especially for our healthcare clients like yourselves, being able to not just provide the advice and that information that you need, but help to enrich those lives of those individuals that we're in front of, and be able to really become part of your journey and part of almost your family as you kind of work through your healthcare career, anywhere from buying, which was obviously our previous presentation, all the way through your practicing years into now where we're at the selling point and looking towards retirement stage of those things as well. So forward focused. With that, we bring you the whole bank. So as I said, my side of things, the professional and healthcare team, we focus on business development, market expertise within the dental space. That's what our lives are generated around. Again, making sure that we're in contact with individuals like Barb, like Michael, and Ryan Devereaux as well. We do that by taking time to understand your needs, your priorities, and doing that deep discovery to see what we can do to help you reach the goals of selling the practice, and then looking into that retirement succession planning. So each of the previous presenters have talked about having that proper team. That last piece within the bank is having the team that we've got. So we have our wealth and our private banking team members that are attached and part of our professional and healthcare team as well. And with that, we bring together that expert knowledge, being able to support you across all stages and be able to do that, and then have the lifelong piece that we do to give you that information. And as you can see with this next slide, anywhere from when you guys are in medical or dental, there should be a secondary slash there. It should say medical or dental school on there, right through residency and practicing. As you can see, I've got retirement highlighted here. I know that one of our previous presenters mentioned that either you could be going into retirement or you could be just actually selling off your practice at this stage because you want to just go back into practicing with the idea on buying another practice down the road. So it's not necessarily that you have to go straight to retirement, but we're looking sort of at that sort of stage of life when we're looking at selling that. But you could certainly be looking at the practice further down the road again. So key factors key factors to take into consideration when selling your practice. So make sure overall understanding that structure. This is again where I'm going to kind of wrap up a lot of it, pieces that I know that Michael obviously touched on, and so the same with Barb, and being able to make sure that we understand what you have in that lease. Utilizing Cirrus or WeCare are fantastic options to be able to fully understand that. Your specialty is dentistry. It's not necessarily reading through a giant lease. But that is a key factor when you're going to sell your practice, to make sure that you understand what those little clauses are. I know Michael provided a great example there of how his client ended up having to pay that extra $100,000. So making sure you do that. On the side with Barb, really getting a true understanding of what the goodwill, the patience. She mentioned that you need to make sure you have patience to make money, that goodwill value of what your practice is generating. From that point of when you actually first buy the practice and as you're going through. I know that it was touched on from the 3 to 5 years, you should be always looking for an appraisal, and have that plan. As far as the bank is concerned, looking for when you're going to be selling. Yes, it can happen somewhat quick, but if it is a long-standing thing that you do know that there is succession to this, and we'll talk a little bit more about succession planning afterwards, having that every 3 to 5 years, that understanding of what it is, or even making sure that you've got to start the plan of selling 5 years out, and having that full understanding of what you're going to be doing, and getting that goodwill to be built up within the patient charts as well. Deveros, he was the one touching on our assets versus our shares. I'm not going to really expand too much further on that, but that has a bigger piece that links into sort of understanding the tax implications of the two different types of sales that you're gonna be doing. As we look at it, if we're looking at that retirement stage, obviously you're going to be possibly looking at a sale of the full practice, but you certainly want to make sure that you understand which side of the assets versus the shares, and how it does have those tax implications, and the proposed transition period with that buyer. I know Michael touched on that as well. Typical dentist to dentist, or if you're using a brokerage firm, in that we look at 6 months to a year, that simple transition to make sure that we avoid any attrition of patients, and make sure that there's comfort within the practice with your associates as well. And that's typically, obviously, if we're not talking about those DSOs, as they will have a longer time, but making sure that you've got it set out, and you have the ability, if you're planning it out well in advance, what way that you want that to transition, so that you're setting off into your retirement or into the next phase of your life as well. So in our previous presentation, we had with purchasing a practice. So this is another key piece. This is actually from that presentation that we had last time from when I was on, and thought it would be important to make sure that you do understand what it is as far as the bank requirements for what we need in order for someone to purchase a practice. Basically kind of doing the flip side of it, and being able to understand what it is that your buyer is going to be needing to get from us as far as the bank is concerned. So obviously we've said it from the get-go. The letter A, appraisal, we need the appraisal. We certainly need that, along with the letter of intent. And then as we kind of proceed through, we're going to need those lease assignment documents. Associate agreements are, if they are in place, again, hopefully, if you've got those longstanding associates, that they do maybe have those agreements in place, so that we can avoid any different liability. And I'm not going to go necessarily list for list here as far as importance, but as I said, the appraisal or letter of intent and lease documentation are key pieces. And then as we kind of progress down, the fully signed purchase and sale agreement, we can operate off of the draft, obviously, as you set that out at the beginning stages of it, but it is something that we do require as a key piece. And then there is requirements of security with life insurance policies and disability as well. So making sure that we understand fully what it is that your buyer is going to need to come to the bank. That's something that, as you're planning out the sale of your practice, if you have a potential buyer, as Barb had mentioned, the sales representatives are going to be very motivated to try and find you and fit you with that proper buyer. If that's someone that either you have or they've actually brought to you, having this information for them up front is actually going to make things a little bit more seamless as well. And again, including the the team that you're putting together, the proper lawyer, lease individual, accountant, your broker, and then obviously your banker as well. Making sure that you've got that strong team to help guide you through that too. Just an outline here of what it is. A couple of these things have been touched on through the other presentations. We will provide 100% purchase financing for your buyer that's purchasing your practice. Same for equipment and leaseholds, up to the 12-year amortization, as we mentioned. Prime minus a quarter, the best rate that you can get on borrowing money in any of the industries out there. And we can have that payment deferral of 12 months. So the principal payment, so you're just looking at interest so they can get on their feet. And then of course, the other fund products in our visas in the line of credit that they're going to need for cash flow. So that was, again, looking at a little bit of a picture as to what the buyer is going to need and what you want to make sure that you're also aware of. But the next piece would be sort of the questions for that next stage. So I mentioned the filtering, the next phase of your life, making sure that you understand all of those different pieces when it comes to either the lease agreement, the LOI, your purchase and sale, and how is this all going to filter into that next phase. Investments, what have you operated with through your practicing career? Have you built up enough investments in order to head into retirement, if that's the path that you're headed down? Do I have enough? Is the cash flow that's coming in within my practice, if I am 5 years out from selling, is that going to be efficient enough to get that higher earnout for when we're going to sell? Is it a full earnout? Is there vendor takebacks? These are different questions that you're going to want to consider as you're looking to sell. How does that actually dovetail into my retirement plans? Is it going to be enough? Do I have a spouse that is either another dental professional, or is there something else that they're doing that's going to work with this with the sale of this practice? And of course, what's the retirement and wealth planning strategy that I've got in place? And this is all in different things that we're going to be able to actually help you with on our side of things, along with the other team members that I've actually got on here with me as well. I did tap in the capital gains tax. I'm not going to pretend to be Ryan Devereaux. I don't want to do that right now. And he's much smarter than me on that stuff. But that's why I'm friends with him. So that's, so I'll make sure to bring him in on that type of things. But it is certainly something that you do have to consider with all the changes going on. As I'd mentioned, we have my partners within my team that we utilize to help guide you, again, on an advice-based process. We don't go at this as an approach on product. This is very much, let's provide the right advice for our clients, for even not our clients. I mean, we want you to have the best setup of what you can, especially when it's such a critical time. Barb had mentioned that two of the biggest transactions in your life is going to be acquiring the practice and selling the practice. So we want to make sure that you're covered. And this is some of the different areas that we'll be able to do that with you. And I know that there's some of these pieces even that the likes of MMP and that can also provide. So it's just making sure that you're set with the proper team and set with the right advice. So sort of your four pillars of wealth, building up that net worth. That's obviously as you're practicing in there. Tax efficient strategies, again, my friend Rye there, he's going to help to build that out, but it's certainly something that from the bank side of things we can provide guidance on as well. I'm going to actually the protecting what matters. Barb had actually said it, and I planned to say it, so I'm just going to reiterate it: is take care of your family. Make sure that those family members and those that are important to you and close are taken care of, and making sure that it's protected in the right manner, whether it's will, trusts, insurance, whatever it is that you might need to do to protect that. And then looking to leave that legacy. So, make sure that you've got that succession planning, you've got an estate settlement. These are all different pieces of the pillars that are key and important while looking forward to selling the practice that you've worked so hard to build up, and being able to make sure that you're set and ready to, as I said, either roll into a retirement or just into that next phase of life. We won't even call it retirement necessarily, and be able to make sure that we're set as you finish out with your practicing career. There's my contact information. As I said, I'd make it short and sweet to sort of wrap and summarize everything for it. I will put that up there. As I said, Barb's going to get this information out to you guys. I really appreciate everybody's time tonight. And Barb, I will turn it back to you.
Okay, so we were definitely willing to field any questions that anyone might have, but nobody's put any into the chat at this point. So if anyone has any questions, they're welcome to put that in there. And if not, I'm going to take a second. We do have a closing poll, so maybe Shirley can put that closing poll up. You're still welcome to submit a question if you have any. While she puts that closing poll up, I guess I would just like to say that I never introduced myself, which I realized once everybody else introduced themselves. I was a little rushed right there at the beginning. So I am Barb Johns. A little bit of background about me. My parents started Tier 3 brokerage 42 years ago. So I've been around for a very long time, although I did raise my own family during that time frame as well. I've been doing what I do full time now for almost full 15 years. Did also run our head office for a long time. It's really great to be part of Henry Schein now. And so I've gone through two transition guys. Once when my parents sold the company to Bill Henderson, Jim and Jen Blair, and again when it got sold again in 2021 to Henry Schein. So if you're nervous about your transition, I feel your pain. Okay, but it worked out really well in the end, if that makes you feel better. We'll give a few more seconds, I guess, Shirley, to have the closing poll question answered.
And there we go. That marks a little bit over a minute. I am closing the poll.
Excellent. Okay,
And do you want me to share results? Or
no, we don't need to share the results.
okay,
No.
okay, good.
And just when I send out the business cards for everybody, that exit poll, I wish it had actually asked the same question about anyone. Do you want Ryan or Michael to reach out to you? So we'll make sure that you're provided with their contact details. Okay, it looks like we might have one. Yes, we do. We do have one question. The question is, does it matter if you have cash sitting in the corp that will be sold with the dental office? So I'm going to give that to Ryan Devereaux to answer, because I know the answer, but he's going to answer it more eloquently.
I don't know about that. You can leave up to 10% of the value in the corporation. So up to 10%, and still qualify for the lifetime capital gains exemption. So sometimes that's a strategy to use more exemption on your exit. And so, yeah, that's available, but you want to be pretty careful that you're not going over that 10% of the value threshold, because that can throw you offside. So yeah, that's your answer.
So follow-up question to Ryan Kinsella: how does that affect how the bank provides funding if they're now going to provide potentially additional funding in order to cover cash that has been left in the corporation at the time of sale?
So
Usually
go ahead.
Usually the cash that's left, sorry, I'm not on mute. Usually the cash that's left behind is just used for that effectively. So you don't need additional financing to fund it.
Thank you. It's a question I guess asked all the time. So even if nobody asked it of us, I'm pretty sure they were wondering, because I get asked that all the time. Okay. If there are no other questions at this point, then I think that we can wrap this up. We really appreciate everybody's time this evening. We know that everybody has busy lives and busy schedules, and we hope that everybody found this evening helpful. Again, reach out to any of us at any time with any questions. We'd all love to chat with you.
Thank you so much, Deb, and thank you so much to all of our participants this evening. That really was a wonderful presentation, and we thank you all for joining us. Today's webinar was recorded and will be uploaded, as Barb said earlier, and it's also going to be uploaded at some point to the Henry Schein Tier 3 Brokerage YouTube channel. So you can look for that as well, but like Barb said, it will also be emailed out in the coming week. We look forward to seeing you at future Tier 3 webinars, and we wish you all a very good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Right.